Welcome to Peace in Math. Completing the square is one of the more advanced ways of solving a quadratic equation. This method always works, although it's not always the easiest method. Here's an example of one it's set up nicely to use completing the square. This is an x squared plus bx equals c form, where you have the variables on one side and then your constant on the other side. Also, the coefficient of x squared is 1. If it's not 1, you can always divide, but sometimes you might want to use a different method if it isn't. The coefficient of x is also even, so that makes it nice because we'll have to divide that number by 2 in this process. We'll take a look at one where it's not set up so nicely later, but let's work with this example first. Now our goal of completing the square is to combine these variable terms on the left into parentheses squared. Once I get parentheses squared, then I'll be able to solve this by square rooting both sides. So here's how we actually do this process of completing the square. I want this part on the left to become a perfect square trinomial, so that way I can factor it into parentheses squared. So I'm going to make this a trinomial, so that means I'm going to have one more term here to get 3 terms. So I'm going to add something here, and whatever I add to the left side, I have to add to the right side. So I'm going to put 2 blanks here. Now to figure out what's going to go inside each of these blank spaces, I'm going to take this coefficient of x, this -8, and I'm going to half it, so I'm dividing it by 2, and then I'm going to square it. So half of -8 would give me -4, and then if I square it, that's going to give me +16. So half it, square it, and then that's what we're going to add. So 16 is going to go inside each of these blank spaces. So now here I have something that I can factor. So we're going to factor this left side. So onto the side, which you don't have to write. This you're just going to be doing in your head. But if I were to factor this expression, my coefficient of x squared is 1. So that means I'm just looking at numbers that multiply to the last, that add to the middle. So -4 times -4, these multiply to +16. And if I add them up, I get the middle number, -8. So this factors to x minus 4 times another x minus 4. And these will always be the same parentheses, so we're just going to write this as x minus 4 parentheses squared. And like I said, this part you don't have to write out, just do that in your head next time. Okay, so this left side, this factors to x minus 4 parentheses squared. And then on the right side, 20 plus 16 gives me 36. So this is the process of completing the square, and from this point on, now I can solve this by square rooting both sides. Okay, so if I want to solve this by square rooting both sides, there's nothing outside of these parentheses squared, so I can go straight to square rooting both sides. The square and square root cancel out, so that means on the left side, I have just the x minus 4. And I'm square rooting both sides, so don't forget plus or minus to include all of your possible solutions, and square root of 36 gives me 6. And then my last step, to get this x by itself, I want to cancel out that -4, so I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So those cancel out, those add up to 0, so I'm just left with x on the left. And then on the right side, I'm going to have 2 different solutions. I'm going to have a +6, and I'm going to add 4, and then a -6, and I'm adding 4. So +6 plus 4 gives me 10, and then -6 plus 4 will give me -2. So those are my 2 solutions, +10 and -2. These are my 2 answers. Now let's take a look at one where you don't have as nice of a setup to solve this by completing the square. The method still always works, it's not as user-friendly this time. So if I want to get this into the form to solve by completing the square, I want my variables on one side, so I'm going to move this 2x squared over to join those on the left. So I'm going to subtract 2x squared from both sides. These cancel out, and then on the left side, I'm going to write down my x squared terms first. 5x squared minus 2x squared, that gives me 3x squared, and then I'm going to bring down that +18x. And then on the left side, all I have left over is the constant. And now my next step, I want this coefficient of x squared to be 1, and right now it's being multiplied by 3, so we're going to divide both sides by 3. So here we divide. And now just make sure you don't forget to divide both of these terms by the 3. That's a common mistake that sometimes people will forget to do. So dividing 3x squared divided by 3, that gives me 1x squared, or just x squared. 18x divided by 3 gives me 6x. And if I divide 69 divided by 3, that gives me 23. And luckily, we didn't end up with any fractions to deal with, so that's nice. And now it's in this form, so we can start to complete the square. I want this left side to become a perfect square trinomial again. So I'm going to add in a space to put my third term. And if I do that to the left side, got to make sure I do it to the right side. And then to get that number that's going to go inside the blank parts, my coefficient of x, this time is 6. And I'm going to divide that by 2, half it, and then square it. So half of 6 gives me 3, and then once I square this, this gives me 9. So 9 is going to go into each of those blank spaces. And now I can factor this part that's on the left. This x squared plus 6x plus 9. Numbers that multiply to 9 that would add up to 6 would be 3 and 3. And so we're going to factor this to x plus 3 parentheses squared. And if I add these numbers on the right, 23 plus 9 gives me 32. So now our completing the square process is done, and now we just have an equation left over to solve by square rooting. So I'm going to square root both sides. So that way the square and the square root on the left side cancel out, so I'm just left with x plus 3. And then as soon as you square root, don't forget to put your plus or minus. And then for this part, square root of 32 is not a perfect square, but let's reduce this radical. I can split this square root of 32 up as square root of 16 times square root of 2. And I chose 16 because it's a perfect square, because I can simplify this to just 4. So this will simplify to 4 rad 2. Another way to simplify this, if you need to see if this worked out, is using the factor tree method. So say you didn't see that 16 went into 32, but you knew 4 did. So you can split this up as 4 times 8. 4 I can split up as 2 times 2, and then this 8 I can split up, we could do 2 times 4, and the 4 I can split up as 2 times 2 again. And since I'm simplifying square root, that means I'm looking for pairs. Here's a pair of 2's, so that means I'd have a 2 outside the radical. Here's another pair of 2's. So one more 2 outside the radical, and then there's 1 left over. That's lonely, nothing to pair up with, so hug it with the square root. And if I multiply these numbers out front, that's going to give me 4 rad 2. So it's another way to get to this answer we got earlier. If you need help simplifying square roots, check out my video on simplifying radicals. That'll give you some extra practice examples if you need it. Alright, now my last step, I just need to get this x by itself. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides to cancel that out. So now I just have the x left over on the left side, and here I can't combine these since this has a radical but this term doesn't, so I'm going to leave them separate, and I'm going to put that radical at the end. So I'll have negative 3 plus or minus 4 rad 2. And here's my two solutions, which sometimes you might see this written out separately, negative 3 plus 4 rad 2, or negative 3 minus 4 rad 2. Here are some practice problems for you to try, so take a second, pause the video, and then on a scrap piece of paper, try and solve these equations by completing the square. And at the end, you can check your answers with the worked out solutions. Good luck! Okay, here's a list of all the answers to each of the practice problems. Completing the square can be kind of tough, so hopefully this helped you get a little more practice, and hopefully this helped you find a little more peace in math. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.